Next, let's check out 3D cameras by opening a 3D project. So first, navigate to your Project Files folder, then navigate to Chapter 2, and then click on the file named Number 2, Creating 3D Cameras. In composition number 1, we can see in the timeline that there are several layers, and most of those layers have already been set to 3D. We can see that because the switches have the 3D box turned on. If we scroll down to the bottom, we can see that the only one that isn't 3D is the stars background, and that's always going to remain in the background because it's at the bottom of our timeline. If we scroll up to the top, you'll also see that there's a layer called Grid Box. This is 3D, but we're not going to use it in our final comp. We'll only use it for a reference when we check out the 3D cameras. The scene is set up with what seems to be an old-fashioned solar system mobile. All of the different 3D layers are tied to different 3D illustrations for the arms, and they all rotate around each other using parenting to keep all the planets tied to the arms. By clicking and dragging on the timeline, we can see that there's already an animation set up for this entire composite. Also, by clicking and dragging on the timeline, we can see the resolution of the comp window drop as we scrub the playhead around. The reason for this is that we're on a Mac and we're using adaptive resolution. If we go up to our preferences for our fast previews, then select the fast previews preference, you may want to change your adaptive resolution limit from 1/4 to 1/8. This will allow After Effects to effectively drop the amount of pixels that it has to present as you interact with the composition. If you're on a Mac and you attempt to enable OpenGL, After Effects will give you a warning and also suggest where you might go to find some more information about OpenGL on the Mac. We'll accept those by clicking OK and go back to our comp window. As we see here, this is a 3D scene, and we know that we can use camera tools inside the orthographic and even our custom camera view, but here inside our active camera, our camera tools are turned off. That's because we can't change the virtual camera that After Effects has given us. We need to add a camera, and then once we've done that, we can use the camera tools to modify it. Because in After Effects, every element has to live in the timeline, and everything in our timeline is a layer, we'll go up to the Layer pull-down menu to add a new camera. If you go across to the right-hand side of this menu, you'll see that the shortcut key is Control, Shift, Command, and C. If you're on a PC, you'll use Alt, Control, Shift, and C. Once you select this, you'll get a dialog box for all of the camera settings for the new camera you'll create. We can name the camera and change all of the parameters in this box, or simply hit OK to create a new camera in our scene. Once you do that, you may notice a small shift in your composition, indicating that we're now looking through this new camera and not through After Effects' default virtual camera. Rather than modifying all of the different parameters to come up with a standard camera, we can use the presets in After Effects to create some of the most common cameras. First, we'll select this camera in the timeline, then delete it, or simply use backspace on the PC. Next, we'll go up to Layer again, and from the pull-down menu, go to New, and New Camera. Now, rather than simply clicking OK, we can use a number of presets by using the Preset pull-down. By clicking on the 50mm preset, you can see the different values here in the dialog box are now modified to simulate what a 50mm film camera might look like. Before clicking OK, we'll simply change its name to 50mm. We'll add another camera, but this time we'll use the shortcut key. Next, we'll use a preset for a 35mm camera and name this 35mm. Again, we'll add a new camera. This time use a much shorter lens of 15mm and name this 15mm to match. Now we have 3 different cameras in our timeline, and as you may have noticed, the composition changes every time we introduce the new camera. The reason for this is that we have active camera selected at the bottom of our comp window. Additionally, the camera that is on the top layer in the hierarchy within the timeline is going to have precedence over the other cameras. If we press F2 to deselect all 3 of these cameras, we can still see that the top camera has priority. The next thing we'll do is change the label color for each of these cameras. So by clicking on the label color, we'll change the second one to a blue, and the third one to a green. If we now switch from the active camera view to our top view, then zoom out by using the comma key, And I'm simply going to hold down the space bar and push this up a little bit. Maybe now zooming back in so we can see all three of these cameras together. We can see the pink camera, which is closest to the center, is our 15mm camera. The blue camera just behind that is the 35mm camera. And last, the one that's selected is our green camera, and it's the furthest from the center. The reason for this is that each camera is created with a focal point at the center of the world and sees the entire frame. The zoom value for the camera is tied to the focal point and pushes the camera back based on the relationship of all of the properties. By double-clicking on each camera, we can open up the dialog box for the camera properties and see exactly how these are linked together. By double-clicking on the layer for the 50mm camera, we can see that the angle of view is tied to the comp size. And because our comp size is 720 by 540, it's pushing the camera back for a value of 1000 pixels so that it can view the entire scene. We'll click OK here and take a look at the 35mm camera. The comp size hasn't changed, but because our angle of view is wider, it doesn't have to push the camera back as far in order to see the entire framing of our comp. Last is our 15mm. This will have the widest angle of view, and again, because it sees much more, it can be even closer to the center of our composition.